Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we are bringing on Jessica Janiuk. Jessica, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. How are you?
I am doing great. I am so excited to have you on the show. It is always a pleasure and also just utter torture when you come on because we know we're in for just boundless puns.
Yes, yes. I will do my best to make it as bad as possible for you.
Good,
And
good.
painful.
And I'm especially looking forward to the absolutely terrible influence you're going to have on the audience.
Good. Excellent.
Good,
Pun
good.
proliferation. It's part of my job title, I'm pretty sure.
It's, yeah. We're gonna push toward pun bounded growth. No.
Ooh, starting strong. It wasn't even for me. Well done. See, I'm having an influence even on you.
Oh no. This is how it starts. This is the beginning of the end. Okay. So, we got people tuning in from all over the place. Hello, everyone. How are you? This is going to be a lot of fun. And we're starting off with a great question. Why Angular again? And that is a wonderful question. So we had Mark on the show about 2 weeks ago. And I think that was the first time that I talked about Angular since I had Brandon Roberts on the show maybe 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago. So feels like a lot of Angular, but for the history of this show, I've actually only had Angular on a handful of times. And the reason I'm so excited about Angular is that I feel like something special is happening in Angular right now, where there's new energy, there's new ideas, there's collaboration, there's stuff that I wasn't seeing coming out of the Angular team until fairly recently. And so Mark, I think, plays a big part in that. That's why I wanted Mark on the show. And then Jessica, I feel you have been bringing a lot of new energy and new ideas into the Angular space. And I know that you're doing that with your team, but I feel like when I talk to you about this stuff, you are bringing like a fresh mind to it in a way that feels very, very special. And so I felt like I couldn't just have Mark or just have Jessica. I had to talk to both of them. So Jessica, before I go too much further, let's talk a little bit about you. So for folks who aren't familiar, can you give us a background on yourself?
Yeah. Kidding. Yes, of course. So my name is Jessica. I have been an engineer for 15 years, I think. Yeah, I'm mildly old at this point, but love this field. I have mostly worked in front end that whole time. Joined Google for a little over 4 years ago, and joined the Angular team 3 years ago. And this is actually a place I never thought I'd be. I had worked with Angular.js back in the day, back in like what 2014, 2015, 2016, and then started picking up Angular 2 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I went to Google I/O and I saw a couple of speakers who are on the Angular team. And I was just like, man, how cool would it be to work with those two folks? Like, they're just powerhouses. They know everything. What a dream. And never, ever in my life thought I'd be here on the Angular team, calling those people colleagues. So, yeah, I'm mostly self-taught. I actually started my career in video production and shifted careers shortly after I, started my. Turns out I don't like video producing, like writing very drab, boring scripts every day. That was not fun. I'm guessing it's more fun when you're doing stuff like in Hollywood, but paid advertising is not great.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's how I ended up here. Now I work on the Angular team. I'm on the core framework team, and I get to do a lot of really cool stuff with the team. I've got to go around and give talks everywhere. and meet awesome people like you, and uh, get to have fun still doing videos here and there. Case in
Yeah, I
point.
was I was gonna say I've had the chance to see some of your video production, and it's really good, like very funny, very quality. So I'm not surprised to hear that that's in your background after seeing some of your work.
Thank you. Yeah, I enjoy it, and I feel like I'm in exactly the right place with the Angular team because I get to flex the engineering skills, get to do these like really difficult challenges, working on a framework used all over the world and having to make sure it works well for everyone, while also getting to do a lot of public speaking, which is something that I actually enjoy quite a bit. And I get to do the video production stuff. So it's like all of my interests, with the exception of the robot building, um, which, for those of you that don't know, I'm a member of the R2D2 Builders Club, and I build Star Wars robots for fun. So
Yes, and I have had a chance to see this R2D2 in person, and it is astonishing. Like, it's life sized. It works. It's got like all the servos and stuff in it so that it moves and doors open. It's incredible. Yeah, because I feel like I saw a picture of it, and I just assumed that it would be like this little R2D2 on the desktop,
yeah,
and
like
then I saw it in
this one
person, and
over
it's
here.
yeah, like that little. Exactly, exactly. But yeah, it is. I always love talking to people who have very like broad bases of experience, because it, to me, that varied experience leads to, I guess, more lateral thought about problems, and so it. I talked about this at length on a previous stream. If you want to watch that, it's on my Tuesday stream. But I was talking about this idea of like how, as an industry, we've really focused on specialists, and we really like people to specialize in, find one thing, go as deep as you can on that thing. But the challenge that I've noticed with that is, if somebody is a deep specialist and they don't have any outside experience, it can turn them into a bit of a battering ram, where they look at a problem and say, well, this is what my expertise says, so I'm going to solve this using my expertise, no matter what the problem is. And the balance of having generalists in a group is that they might not be able to go as deep, but they've seen a broader set of problems, and so they can say, I see what you're trying to do, but if we turn the problem like this, we can actually solve it in a much less painful way. And then it's like, wow, oh, okay. And so I wonder, did that experience, did your previous experience as you were joining the Angular team, has that come into play, like as you're planning the future of Angular, as you're talking about some of these new features and APIs? Do you feel like the generalism in your past is feeding that?
I certainly do. And actually, I think not just on the Angular team, I think that generalism and ability, like especially the visual, since I worked in video and have that ability to see things in a more visually creative way, I have found that that has impacted my ability across my whole engineering career, especially in areas like UX. Because I'm sure you've worked with people who've been very focused on a solution, but they get so caught up in how they have internalized this solution that they have built the experience around that.
Yes.
And they aren't thinking about it from how somebody else who's coming into it is going to use it.
Yeah.
And I've found that my background can really help me kind of get out of that mentality of thinking about it in that way. So I'm able to maybe think through a better user experience from the get-go. And I actually think on the Angular team that also plays into like usable API design. It's maybe not as visual, but it comes from the same place of like, as a developer, is this something that I'm going to want to use myself? And when someone comes in here, is this going to be too much? or too little or not named well enough. As we know, the most difficult problem in engineering is naming things. So, yeah, I think that's where my background has really helped a lot.
Yeah, and I feel like it shows. I think there's a freshness that I'm feeling in discussions about Angular, and I think that it's due to pushing that envelope and rethinking it and saying, just because we've done it this way, does it need to continue to be that way? And Brandon is in the chat right now, and I think that Brandon's been a really good voice for this as well. Where like I just saw something, Brandon, I got to get you back on the show because I saw what looked like single file JSX style Angular components in analog, which is super interesting. And like, what happens if we reimagine it to this API that other frameworks are standardizing on? That's really interesting. But I'll talk to Brandon about that later. I want to talk to you about. Let's start with defer, because I feel like defer is a big change in
Angular.
Angular. I had analog locked in my brain. I was like, what's happening? But so defer feels like kind of a big shift, or a big boon to Angular developers, I guess I should say. How did that come about? Like, what's the backstory?
So, like, defer is something that we've known we've needed something like it for a while. There have been kind of user space created tools to solve the defer loading problem or lazy loading problem in Angular. And if you were to like dig into them, they're actually not intuitive to use at all. They're very confusing, and it's been frustrating to the users because it's the best they had, the only options they had. So like it's been in our backlog of like, yeah, we need to solve this for users, but we weren't really sure exactly the best approach. And let's be honest, like the Angular team is not huge. People probably think, oh, it's Google, so many engineers, it's a big, must be a huge team, but it's not. There's only like 6 of us on the core framework team, and all of the work we have to balance across the 6 people and basically anybody else outside of the core team that wants to contribute. But it does make it hard for us to make things happen like this that we want to see, especially when we have a lot of other priorities. So it took until now for us to really have everything in the right place to make defer happen. And along with this came the new control flow. And as we were kind of working through defer, we realized the new control flow was a necessary part of how defer was going to work. Because one of the things we originally considered for defer was like a higher order component kind of approach, like you see in other frameworks with suspense and whatnot. But it became kind of clear to us that the answer for us might be to be able to do it as part of a template where you can just say, hey, we've got this component and it's got this, HTML in it. What if I just want to deal with a subsection of that? Maybe it's another component, maybe it's another set of components, maybe it's, something else. And that's where things kind of started heading in the direction of what we ended up with defer. So, and then from there we realized, well, if we're going to do this, we also should probably do what we've been talking about with our control flow so that the syntax is the same. Because we didn't want to write something that would then have to be rewritten when we decided on what that control flow would look like.
Right.
And all the churn that would come with that. So
yeah. And so you're in an interesting position because Angular is very mature as a framework. And I think that one of its biggest strengths is the fact that it is it is a good enterprise bet. Like if you need something that just scales, that's going to work forever, you can pick Angular and you can run with it. Mark talked about this when we had him on the show a couple weeks ago. That's sort of like a core tenet of Angular is like build for scale. As
as a core tenant, though, it is always played forward. We don't actually go backwards with yes. So
I just my whole brain just shorted out. So if we look at that as like, you have to balance this idea of like lots and lots of people in enterprise teams. And enterprise teams, I think, are a little slower to adapt, a little less willing to take on new changes and new tech because they've got stuff to build. They don't have time to goof around with the latest tech. You know, it's like Twitter might make it seem like everybody's rebuilding everything every 5 days or so, but that's not the reality in like real companies. So as you're balancing this need, you're also seeing these opportunities from the future. You're seeing things happening in throughout the community, and you're introducing things like defer. You're introducing the control flow updates. How are you balancing those decisions as you look at like what could the future of Angular be without completely upsetting the apple cart of everybody who relies on Angular now?
It's the TLDR is that it's hard. We spend a lot of time thinking about like how can we do this with minimal breaking changes, and part of the philosophy is Angular is that we bring people along with us. We don't just like break them and leave them behind and say like, tough, you gotta fix it yourself. So like we have these migrations that we write to help that people can just, when they install the next version, they can run it, and it's supposed to take your code from the old version and like update it to the new version and have it just work. In the ideal situation, they don't have to do anything. I mean, in practicality, there's usually a little bit that people will still have to do. So what you're talking about, even with Angular, is a very real situation where saying like, yeah, I'd like to get on the latest version of Angular or any framework can be a really tough sell to a big corporation when, their goal is not getting to the latest version of Angular. Their goal is to sell whatever widgets they're selling so that they can, continue operating as a business and pay everybody and whatever,
Right.
So, and while tech debt is a part of every project and eventually we get prioritized, we need to make it easy for people to move forward. So we do our very best to do that. So like I said, it's hard. And I mean, I spent 3 months writing the migration for control flow. So that people can run it and just get switched over to the new version.
And when you say migration, like this is something that I really do appreciate about the Angular team is you're not just saying like a migration guide. You're saying I will go in and code mod your code base so that you don't have to write code. That's hard. It's time consuming, but it's such a big deal for, I think, keeping the trust of the community. Like, I don't know. When I'm working with a framework and that framework launches a new feature and it's like, if you want to use this new feature, here's all the things you're going to have to refactor. I'm just like, I'm tired, man. You do this every couple of months and I'm sick of having to rewrite my code base. I want to build the thing I'm building, not tinker with whatever the changes are in your code base. So those code mods, this thoughtfulness about the API, that's a big deal. And I think it matters a lot, especially as you start thinking about, it's not just me now. It's me and my team of 5 other engineers. It's me and my company with 15 engineering teams with 10 each on it. Like the bigger the teams, the bigger the product, the more important this problem is to solve properly. And I think that is something that, the working at Google scale, I think helps you think through like, what does that mean?
Well, and I think knowing the history of Angular, we learned this need the hard way. I
wasn't going to bring it up.
I mean, it's not like we shy away from
Yeah.
talking about that. Like the move from Angular.js to Angular was not a smooth one. It was controversial at the time, and um, here we are, and we're still moving forward. And in that process, we realized like how important it is to make sure we don't break people. So
Yeah.
it also helps that like I think a lot of enterprises turn to Google because or to Angular because they know that it's backed by Google and that it's used at Google, and every release that we do is like essentially validated by the fact that it's being tested against a bunch of internal Google projects.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time it hits them, it's pretty well vetted. So that builds a lot of trust. So, but yeah, like as we think about moving forward and trying to evolve the framework and improve the developer experience and add new cool features like deferrable views, there are the challenges of how do we do this in a way that isn't too hard for people, it doesn't introduce too many concepts at once, that doesn't change the public API such that it's so fast that people can't keep up. That is a big concern that we've had, that we're moving a little too fast. So as opposed to moving a little too slow and then people think we're stale. So that balance in the middle of how you can maintain that is something we think about a lot.
I do not envy the what those meetings must be like. But so speaking of introducing new concepts, I think I would love to just start seeing this in action. I'm really excited to see how this new API works. So let me switch us over into, let's see, I'm going to get my screen on here. And then I'm coming over to this view, not that view. What is that one? Get that one out of here. We want this one. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna put this up, and I'm going to remind everyone that this episode, like every episode, is being live captioned. You can see the link to see those captions down at the bottom. I'm still working on figuring out how to get those piped directly in. I'll get it there, I promise. And that is made possible through the support of our sponsors. So we've got Netlify and Vetsu Code both kicking in to help cover the costs of operating the show. Thank you very much to both. And I'm looking for sponsors. So if you or your company want to give me some money, I'll take it. Thank you, please. We are talking to Jessica today. So here is Jessica's website. If you want to go check out, you can see here. I'm not going to click on it. I'm going to make you click on it. Go look at that R2D2. I'll put the URL up here for anybody who's not getting the comments posted through. And we are talking about Angular. So Angular has a cool new website, Angular.dev.
Yeah, it is a fancy, cool new website as opposed to mine, which is really behind. So don't look at the code.
I like simple. I feel like simple is underrated, I think, because...
Oh, no, I agree with that.
Oh, I just shouldn't look at how you built it.
Yeah, this is actually running Angular, but it's running Angular from like 2017. And I can't update it because I think I ejected it from the CLI. There's a whole bunch of reasons why I can't. So in order to get it updated, I'd have to rebuild it, and who's got time for that?
No,
exactly. As long as it works. But the problem is my GitHub link doesn't work because I changed my GitHub username.
Oh no!
And I haven't been able to redeploy it.
This is like the classic problem. I'm stuck on an older version of my framework too because I did something clever, and now I can't.
Exactly.
The migration doesn't work because I did something silly that. I feel the pain.
That's exactly it. I think if you want to, you can go click on connect, and then under connect, I think that GitHub link probably works. Yes, that one works. So there you go. That's. But don't look at that code because it's like 10 years old almost at this point. or do, and feel free to judge me. That's perfectly fine. All right. So yeah, we got this new Angular.dev website. We're really excited about it. It's beautiful. It shows off our brand, our brand new branding. And
Which is very nice.
yes, I am a fan, except for now none of my, I can't wear any of the t-shirts I had anymore.
Oh, now they're vintage.
Now they're vintage. Yes. Yes. But I love that this changes color.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's lovely. So one of the cool things about this website is you can actually go to the tutorials page and actually learn in browser, which is something that we've wanted to have available for a long time and now actually is available. So and if you're interested in like learning along with us today, you can hop over to that tutorials, click on start coding under Learn Angular in your browser, and then up at the top, you can select where it says Learn Angular Introduction and go down to Deferrable Views, which is right here.
Yeah, so here we are.
Yes.
So I'm ready. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Can everybody see? Why don't I blow this up just a tad? And let's see, if that gets too chaotic, I can make it a bit smaller again, but I think this will work.
So we talked a little bit about what defer is.
Can I just do a little bit of props on the design of this website? Did everybody notice that as I resized this browser, I was able to like adjust these panes so that I could make it look the way I wanted to, instead of like it's blown up and now my code's all smushed and I can't adjust. It's little. This is good. It's just good. It's a good job on this website. Whoever built it, it's nice.
You adjusted those panes with very little pain. All right, scrolling on. The whole concept of deferrable views and defer is that you are able to put essentially a block within your template using this @defer, and then everything inside that block is is essentially lazy loaded. It's put into a separate chunk, and you are allowed to essentially configure it so that the lazy loading occurs at whatever is your preference for how your users are going to use it. So we've got a couple of built-in triggers, and we'll go over that in this, but the trigger examples are on interaction, which would be something like clicking or focusing, on hover, which is probably fairly obvious, but if you move your mouse over that area, or viewport, which is a common need. So once an item enters the viewport, it will actually load the content. So there's a few others, but that's the idea. And yeah, so let's jump in.
Let's do it.
So Andrew Kushner, who is the person I worked with most on Defer, and I wrote this tutorial, and we hope it's fun. So we're going to start by following our instructions here. It says add a defer block around the comments component.
Okay, so I just straight up do one of these.
Yep.
And that's it.
And essentially, that's it. So the default behavior here is it uses the idle trigger. So essentially, when defer or the idle callback, request idle callback fires, it triggers the loading of the comments. It's the same thing as if you put in parentheses right after defer on idle. It's the same exact thing. Okay. So, but that is the default behavior. So from here, I think we can keep scrolling down. The defer blocks themselves have quite a bit more to them. So we actually built in some things like placeholders. Like, what do you want to show when this stuff hasn't loaded yet?
And this is feels a lot like how in other frameworks you would have like an is loading kind of Boolean, and then you would say if it's loading, then you show this, otherwise show the comments, or you end up with some. You have to build your own control flow to decide
Yes.
what piece of logic or what piece of UI to show. So I do like that. This is kind of nice that it has what is effectively it feels like an if else to me, but it's you're abstracting all this logic away so that I don't have to figure out. Okay, is it loaded? Did it error? Did it do whatever? Because
Right.
I'm imagining you've probably got that handled here for me.
Exactly. So with that in mind, we can add a loading block too. That's our next step.
Great. All right, we got a loading block, and that goes right down here. Of course it does. Managed to hit buttons that I shouldn't have hit, but that's okay. We're gonna make it work. So we'll say loading. All right.
Awesome.
And then when I reload, and it's
I
happening
mean,
so fast.
your
that I
idle is
can't
so
leave.
fast. Yes. So we'll get to that. So there's a couple other cool things that we added. So in the case, there are many times, I'm sure you've encountered this, where you've got something that, like an animation is triggering, and it happens so fast that you get a flicker instead of some, like either you don't want it to show if it's that fast, or you want to make sure it shows at least for a certain amount of time so it doesn't flicker.
Right.
So we added the ability to add parameters for this with these placeholders and the loading. So you can have the loading show for a minimum of a certain amount of time. And loading also has after. So the animation flicker, yes. Yes, so you can add those. So like to the loading here, the thing is to say put a minimum of 2 seconds. So
and then
loading
and
shows for
so
2 seconds.
and like there are points where so I feel like somebody out there just screamed at their computer, why would you do that? That's like, why would you make it feel slower? But I actually think it makes the site feel faster if things feel intentional. So if I look at 1 second of loading versus a flicker, 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 and then there's something on screen, it creates this feeling of like solidness in an app where it's intentionally designed, and you go from like view to view to view in a way that it's like the developer clearly thought this through, and this feels good, right? So I love that you didn't just do after. I like that you can set a minimum, because I feel like that can create some really good experiences.
Yeah, we thought so too. And like we're definitely thinking about layout shift with this too, where if you have that weird flicker, you can see content just shifting around. And if it's going too fast, that's just not great. So being able to configure this in a way such that you can control that layout shift to happen at the times that you want it to give the user the best possible user experience in this situation. So so you can also do the after, and the after setting is essentially don't start showing this until I think you have to put a semicolon.
Semicolon.
Yes.
Okay.
So
and so this
so
one
the after
should not show.
Yeah, it should not show. So in this case, it will not show the loading unless it took longer than 1 second. So don't show loading until after 1 second. And if it loads before that 1 second, it doesn't show it at all. That's essentially the way that configuration works. Placeholder also has a minimum, but placeholder, of course, is not the same as the loading. It doesn't have to wait. You don't have to worry about waiting for the placeholder, because that content's your default content, like that shows before the stuff is loaded. So there's no reason to have an after for that. So you just have the minimum for placeholder.
Gotcha. And there was a question here from Linda Cat. Does the order matter after the defer? Like, could you do loading and then placeholder?
It does not matter. You can put whichever ones you want in whichever order. So
we can pull this one out, drop it right up here, and it works exactly the same.
Hmm.
Great.
There's also an error block, so at error. So if for some reason you have an issue with your server, and let's say you have a component in there that that component is set up wrong, or your server dies while you're doing something and it fails to come back, you'll get that error block.
Gotcha.
At the moment, I don't believe we have access to the error, but I believe it's being captured in like logs. So it just won't show up in your console. You won't be
Sure.
able to like take the like error E and like do something with the output. So that's something we've talked about adding in till later, but we have not done that. So that's essentially the basic structure of how defer works. Um, so we got this, but there's a little more we can do. So why don't we? I think there's a next page.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
there's
wait, we
more here.
missed.
There's more here. So yes, okay. So we're going to change the defer block to use one of the triggers.
Okay.
So, and this is,
Okay.
an incredibly common need, right? That the viewport is like you've got a heavy component. You don't. It's below the fold. You don't really want to worry about people having to like keep that in your view. You don't want to have it in your main bundle. You want to defer it to later. So yes, that is how this is intended to work.
So we've pushed the comments down, and now when I scroll down, oh, they're already there. They're
Yeah,
so fast.
we may need to. I think we have add content here. Scroll down a little bit because I know we wrote something to make this work a certain way. Yeah, we even gave you content that you could have copy
Oh,
pasted
look
in
at
there.
that. That would have been
Yeah,
nice for me to scroll down and actually use.
yeah, and like if you read that content, it is definitely honest content and stuff that is important
Let's
that you should think about.
let's
So
do it. Here we go. Let's see. This is great. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change the minimum here so that we can see. I'm going to take this out and leave this on so that we can see when we get to this view that it's actually loading once we get down. Because my guess is, I'm making an educated guess here that you're being a little bit optimistic. You're not starting it when it enters the viewport. You're starting it right before it enters the viewport, because it looked like it was already here before I got to it.
I think there's a little bit of pixel padding at the top. Yes.
See that?
Yep.
There it
There it
is.
goes.
So, and because that was loading so fast, like I think if we could tell that comments to like, do a set time out of 500 milliseconds or something, we could. Oh, I guess we can, because look, here's the code.
Yeah.
Neat. So we could, if we wanted to, add some kind of a timeout. I'm probably not going to do that because that would derail us. But that's in action once this reloads. It didn't reload because I didn't change enough. What if I do this? There you go. Yeah. And then as soon as it's in view, it loads. So great. I mean, that's really intuitive. That feels nice. Like this makes sense to me, and I don't write Angular day to day. I don't feel like I would need to dive into your API docs next time. I could just do this.
And that's awesome. That was part of the goal of what we were aiming for. What's cool is this isn't even where it ends.
All right.
So
all right.
this is where our little tutorial ends. But there's actually, so like those are the built-in triggers we talked about. So we've got the on viewport, we've got on interaction, there's on timer, on hover.
What does... Can we look at on interaction? Because that's actually really interesting.
Sure.
Yeah, so if I write on interaction, then it says future comments here, and I clicked on it and it loaded the comments. Ooh, I like that, because this, I thought you were going to tell me like, oh yeah, now you got to create a button and you got to do this whole thing. Nope. just click to view comments. And then we'll change, I don't know, we'll change this to a button. Why not?
Sure.
And now it's actually, you got a button, you click the button does stuff. I didn't have to write any logic. That's pretty dang cool.
Right? I think it's awesome. So yeah, we've got interaction, and that also works with focus. So it's a set of, we didn't use on click because we want,
I see what you mean on interaction.
Interaction, yeah. So, like if you were to tab to it, or it should.
There it goes. Yeah, I think it was on focus leave. It just did it.
Yeah. So it should be a set of events that triggers the whatever interaction is. We based it off of, I think we looked at Astro, and then we looked at some internal stuff for what people are currently using for their interaction-based triggers. So the things that we can do also is configure prefetching. So
like that.
At the top of where you have on interaction, you can actually put a semicolon and go prefetch on, and then give it a different trigger. So like you'd say idle, prefetch on idle. So now when you interact with it, it doesn't actually have to fetch the code. It's already here.
And note, we have our minimum on here. So if I come in here and let's do this. Let's make it a little bit longer. And 2, 3. Oh, it was actually so fast that it didn't even do it. Or actually, is it going to skip around the loading because it doesn't need the loading screen anymore if it's prefetched?
I think because you have minimum, it likely will skip around loading. So if you did not have minimum there, it would skip right to it.
Well, I think, let me check. I'm going to make this even longer. Let's make this 10 seconds. And now we've got our thing. And I think because we're prefetching, now that it's loaded, it skips right over loading. That's great. That's really cool, actually.
Yeah, so there's no need for it because the content already exists. That's right. We think that's great. You can actually also do custom conditions. So we have this on interaction. You can also say when and then truthy value. So if you are wanting to make this conditional based on something that you have written yourself.
All right, let me do something like this. Input type checkbox, and we'll give it a name of like, all right, this is where I'm going to need help with Angular stuff, but show comments, and we'll do ID of show, and then out here I'll give it a label for show, and it's going to say show comments. And I think this makes sense. Like, this is a interaction that I would create in an app that I built. I'm just going to put a little paragraph tag around this so that it's in 2 lines. Okay, so we've got a box. When I check this box, I would like to update some value. So basically, what I would like to do in pseudocode is when show comments is checked. I don't know how to do that in Angular.
And I'm trying to remember how to do it with a checkbox input. So you're going to have to do a binding on the input. What we can do is, if you scroll down to the actual component where it says app component, we can actually create a variable in here that will hold that value.
Okay.
Yep. And I wonder if we want to make it a signal.
What did I did something wrong. Do I have to just like that? Nope, that's not it.
No.
Leave me alone, I'm busy. It says unexpected
get rid of the let.
Oh, and now it's fine. I think it just got out of sync. Okay.
So here's what I think you want to do. I think we want to create our value here as a signal. So I think we have to import. I don't use signals very often because I don't write Angular code very often. I write Angular framework
Here
code.
I am putting you right on the spot.
Yes. Let's see, where do we import? I think you import signals from core. Let's see, signal, yeah. So if you go to the top line where it says import component, you can just type signal.
Capital?
I don't think you need it to be capital, just regular signal. Yeah.
Okay.
Now scroll down and then equals, let's see, is it new signal? I can't remember. Let me double check so I get it right. Where do we have that? I think you can just say signal.
Like that?
Yes.
Right. What do you... Yeah, I gave you one. Leave me alone.
I think that's how it works.
Okay.
And then if you go back up to your checkbox, we're going to need to bind like click to this. So I think that's parens click.
Parens click.
And then equals. And then in here, I think you'd want to say show comments is equal to, I don't know if we can do this syntax, but do like not show comments. So invert it. Oh, right. Because it's signal, we actually have to set the signal value. That's right. So we need to set it to be a writable signal. So we need to import writable signal. That's right. And it does need to be caps.
Okay.
And then we'd swap the signal with writable signal.
And is writable, well, I can't spell. Signal. No? What isn't it like?
Yeah, what doesn't it like?
Only refers to a type.
Let's see. Again, I don't write.
This says signal is a writable signal. So if I add checkbox in my input, you can access the value like checkbox.checked.
Give me a second. Yeah, and that's essentially what we're trying to do.
Okay, so...
All right. Yes, so...
like that?
I was right with signal just being...
signal just being signal.
Signal, yes.
Okay.
And the thing that we need to do is actually do the signal name dot set and then the value that we're setting it to. So...
dot set.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then show comments. And is
you don't need the equals and not show comments anymore.
Oh, I got it. Okay. Oh wait, now I need to actually set it to do this. So when show comments, can I do that?
You would want to do when that might work. See what happens when you click show. Well, except for that, it's showing comments.
Yeah, it loaded them immediately. So
that's saying that it's grabbing the actual value. So if I recall, you have to do dot value on the signal, and then that would be like value is equal to true, or no, it's you call it like a function. Sorry, you
call it like a function.
Yeah, it's a yes. But it did not set.
It did not
so
do
I,
it. Needs
I think you
brackets? What needs brackets?
I think when we're doing show comments dot set, the not show comments needs to also be in parens. The show comments parens, because we want to set it to the non-value.
Oh, there we go. Look at us.
Yep.
And we it looks like it doesn't like
It
unset,
doesn't,
and that's
yeah,
okay.
it doesn't unload it. Right. It's a one direction.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, this is great. Like, I I think these are the sorts of interactions that, this is the stuff we have to build all the time. And being able to, hide away an expensive operation like loading potentially hundreds or thousands of comments on a big enough article, like that's a big deal.
It is. Yeah.
And having
And
it
what,
be, I mean, honestly, like the hardest part was remembering the syntax, but this is really
yeah.
straightforward.
And we love it. Like we love added to this. You can actually you can put these together. So you got when show comments. You could also add it on. You could have prefetch when and prefetch on. You could have multiple, all on one defer block. So you can fully customize it. So like, let's say your custom condition is, I don't know, something further up the page, or someone interacts with it. So that way you make sure you capture that event appropriately for that particular situation.
Let's do that. I like that. So if I come in here, I have a checkbox way up at the top.
Mm-hmm.
This one will show my comments, but if I don't do that and I reload this and I come down, I do want this to still work. So I can just stack these.
Yeah, you can just put the on interaction back in there.
And now this is unchecked. I come down here, I click, and there we go. That's slick.
Yeah, we love it. Now, there's a few caveats to be aware of, and that is, so if you're
look what you've done. Look.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you. No, you can stay here. The door's open. You can stay here.
Oh, geez.
Welcome in my house anytime. So we have these things called standalone components, and we have these things called ng modules. And hey, it's Mark. Good to see you, Mark. With modules, there's limitations on how this defer works. So if you try to use a component that is from a module as the deferred thing, so if comments here was inside an ng module, it would not actually defer.
Okay.
So it needs to be a standalone component, or it needs to be like if it's going to be something that isn't in a module, it needs to be a transitive dependency through. So like you've got your comments component that's standalone, and it inside there has a bunch of dependencies. Those can be in modules. That's fine.
Okay.
So you just got to make sure that root thing that you're trying to defer is a standalone component.
Got it.
That is unfortunately, we were trying to make it work for both, but there's some indirection with the ng modules of knowing the dependencies, and it just makes it really difficult for us to resolve them in a way that isn't already eagerly loaded. So
is there a like a best practice for somebody writing Angular? Is the guidance to use the standalone components now and like to start moving away from modules, like don't create new modules or something?
Modules will be around, like people will still use them, and there's good purposes for them, but we recommend standalone. And actually, I think standalone now is the default generation for the Angular CLI. It used to be that it would generate modules by default. Now new applications are always standalone by default. So we encourage people to do everything with standalone components. But that said, if you have like a library you're using, sometimes people still want to use modules for that. And we don't plan to remove support for modules. So they'll be around.
They'll work forever, but they're not necessarily like what you should start with today.
Yes, that's a
Gotcha.
good way of putting it. It's definitely not what you should start with today.
Got it. Got it. That's great. I like that. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you are trying to defer some code that's built in an ng module, you can just wrap that with a standalone component to get
Yes.
the deferral. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So caveat, but easy workaround. That's always good news. And then we don't break backward compatibility ever. And that is
Right.
also very nice.
Yes. And a
Also,
challenge.
I hope you're proud of yourself because Mark's in here doing puns in the chat too. So
I mean, I gotta say that before I joined the team, there just weren't any puns, and now that I'm on the team, everybody's
yes,
doing it.
yeah.
So I'm gonna take responsibility for that, and I'm not ashamed. So a couple other things is that people would be curious, like what's eagerly loaded and what's deferred, given the different blocks. So there's the at defer section, there's the placeholder and the loading and the error in your defer block. The deferred content is just the stuff that's in the top main defer block. The loading block, the placeholder block, the error block, those are eagerly loaded. So that might seem obvious to some people, but it's good to be clear about it. Like that, if you have these really heavy loading and placeholder components, that kind of defeats the purpose of defer loading your content. So just think
So
about that as you.
keep these ones as lightweight as you can because they're going to be loaded no matter what.
Or if they are heavier, try to load them early on in your application because they're loaded and you don't have to worry about future loading of that content. But yeah, it's just good to note that about how this works.
Got it.
So, and it's also worth noting that this isn't the end of defer as far as improvements we're looking at. So we're definitely thinking about using this as kind of like a foundation to build other things on top of. So
I just thought of so on the like the D&D alignment charts, there's like chaotic good, chaotic evil, all that kind of stuff. I like to think of myself as chaotic good, but this idea that I just had, I think, is chaotic evil. What happens if I start nesting defer blocks? So as an example, in here I am deferring comments, but let's say I've got a loading spinner. But inside this, I have a loading component then. And inside that loading component, I start deferring things in there. What happens? Like, is that just going to work? And if I've got my loading component inside of the defer block, it will be deferred. It'll be deferred, but it could do like loading, 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 and then my final thing? Or like what's the flow going to be?
You can do that.
It'll I do
work.
that?
So, it's best to avoid the cascade effect because what people could potentially do is they could use the on immediate trigger, which on immediate is intended to essentially be like, this isn't in your main bundle, but I want it to start loading right away. So essentially your page renders and then immediately it starts fetching. That's how on immediate works. And if you were to, like, say, put a defer block on immediate, and then inside there you've got code that has another defer block that has on immediate and another one that has on immediate, you get this weird cascade loading effect. So the first on immediate finishes loading, then the second one appears and it finishes loading, and then the third one appears. So we advise not doing that. And we do have some things. We have like the equivalent of a lint rule or a diagnostic that will catch it if you do it in the same template, but we can't catch it if it's like in a separate component.
Sure.
So like, there's, I think we actually have it in the defer guide. There's in the reference in the docs section for it. We have I think it's under docs. It might be under reference. I can't remember how we have this all. I think it's under deferrable views, that top one, I think, is what you want. Not that one.
Not that one.
That one will work because this is all the same page.
Oh, got
So, so on here on this page, we have some things about like patterns to avoid. So, but this is pretty fleshed out as far as how all of this works. So it should be really helpful. Yeah, nested defer blocks and avoiding cascading loads. That's exactly the thing to avoid. Like the Aurora team has worked with us, and they are on the Chrome side and deal with all the core web vitals and whatnot. And they have also made strong recommendations of like, don't try not to affect your CLS with where you're putting these defer blocks. So,
is this the right thing to link to for Aurora?
Yeah, that is the Aurora team's page.
We'll start here. Yeah. So this is just for anybody who's never heard that name before. Aurora is what?
Aurora, I don't know that I know their exact definition, but they're a team that is part of the Chrome team, and they interface with a lot of outward-facing projects. They're kind of like I don't know how you describe them, liaisons, possibly.
And their focus is like helping everybody make the web more performant, right? Like that's sort of the overarching mission.
Yes, and that's across frameworks. So they work with the React team, the Vue team, Solid. Like they have connections to everybody. They work with us, and they are very much focused on improving core web vitals and making the web a good experience for everyone. So, we showed them defer, and they were just wanting to call out that, like, you probably don't want it to be like your main content that you're deferring on your page. So like that like, the thing that core web vitals is going to look at is like, your main content. That would probably cause your core web vitals to drop in that case, and take a hit to your layout shift as well. So avoid those on content that would be loaded during the initial render of the page that's in the viewport, because that's going to be a negative impact on your core web vitals.
Got it. Very cool. So, all right. Chat, we've got a little bit of time left. Now is your time. If you have specific questions, if you want to see specific patterns, start dropping those questions now. Jessica, is there anything else that we should look at in this API? Any other features that we should dig into to make sure people get the full picture?
I mean, this is basically how defer works and all the features of it. We can talk a little bit about kind of maybe directions we're thinking of going.
Ooh, I like that.
So if you are doing server-side rendering right now, these will hydrate after they finish loading. So you don't have to do anything special there. One of the things that we are currently investigating is essentially progressive hydration, using defer as kind of the back end or the foundation for that. So we're kind of exploring how you would define how the content would render on the server. For example, maybe on the server, since everything's faster on the server, you actually want the main content to render on the server side, but not have that component fetched and have the actual component fetched as a defer, defer loaded. So the comments would be rendered on the server side, and then you would get that content on the client side, but you would still have it deferred loaded. So when you started interacting with it, then that actual content would fetch. So you'd have dehydrated content on the page.
Oh.
So the cool thing about that is that there would be no concerns about layout shift because your placeholder is your content.
Right. That also, I really like that strategy for a lot of content because I think that as an industry we've trended a little toward like we got worried about stale content. Everybody was all static all the time, right? And so I think there's been a bit of an overcorrection where we've been like, well, now we're all servers all the time. And it feels like we're just putting a lot of work onto the computers that we don't need, especially for stuff that isn't mission critical. Like if I'm showing a comment section, if I'm showing some supplemental information on the page, I don't really need to load all of it. Like I can show the state from a few minutes ago, and that's okay. I don't need to like fresh render that every time. We don't need to do that data load. And having the ability to display that on the page with, I don't know, a little note that says like, there's 5 new comments, you want to show them, and then it actually loads the new stuff. But if I never get there, I don't have to load that data. I don't have to do that work. I don't have to put that load on my user's computer. That's really, I feel like that's respectful design, right? Is we should do as little as we need to get somebody the information they asked for, and then be thoughtful about the UX to let them get the things they might want when they actually want them or when they actually request them.
Right. I think that's a driving factor behind defer in the first place. We defer to our users.
I like it. That's a respectful pun.
Thank you.
So this might not be a question that you want to take. So please feel free to defer this question. Should people be looking at using signals instead of RxJS, or when would you draw that line? I guess.
So yes and no. It depends on what you're doing. For the average thing like what we did here, where we're just interacting with an input or whatever, signals are perfect for that. Observables and RxJS are really for your complex, complex data, and especially data that needs to be updated, like in the streaming data kind of situations, because that's what observables are for. Really, observables are pretty heavy for the average need of what somebody's doing on their Angular app. Or any app, really. And by default, we think signals is the right approach for most things that we're doing here. Like right now, we're working on how signals can be used as part of inputs. And there's signals is a big foundational element of our system now. And we think it's much easier to write. It's much easier to follow. And if you can remember the syntax, like clearly I did when we were working on this, but yeah, use signals and then use RxJS when it's appropriate is essentially the answer here.
And the when is it appropriate is always the $10 million question.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, I mean that's our job as developers is to determine where the trade-offs start to lean one way or the other, and my gut is almost always like lean simpler because we think we're gonna build something highly complex, but in reality, usually what we're doing is not that wild. It's 2 or 3 things moving on a page at a time, and it's like, yeah, I didn't need to bring in 45 kilobytes of JavaScript to update these 4 pieces of text. Like, probably wasn't really the right idea there.
Exactly. Yeah,
and by the way, 45 kilobytes is a number I just pulled out of the air. I have no idea what any of these libraries weigh. It's just so in case anybody just was like, "How dare you? RxJS is not that big." I don't know how big RxJS is.
Yeah, I tend to leaner too. Yeah.
Just God.
Especially when rendering, I prefer it leaner than fattier. It just tastes better.
I do appreciate a cooking pun. Um, Brandon says to defer those kilobytes. Correct. Raphael is asking, is 2024 Angular's year to propel? What are the plans this year? Do you have anything big in store?
Well, we don't actually have a store. Actually, that'd be really cool if we did. People could get their new Angular merch in
I
that
need an
store.
Angular hat.
I know. That's actually something I would love to see us do, where we we have official Angular merch, and then like all of the profits would go to like helping some underserved community learn how to code or something like that. I'd love to see something like that.
Do love that.
Um, I mean, we've got a lot of underlying things related to like signals as inputs. That's a huge thing that's coming soon. A lot of people are really interested in that. Zones has been something that we've wanted to get closer and closer to being an opt-in sort of thing and not required. For those who are not familiar, Zone.js is the thing that kind of powers change detection in Angular, and signals is our slowly maneuvering to be able to not need Zone.js anymore, so we can do more granular change detection. So that's a big thing.
Though, that I should aim to be in the zone.
I mean, you should definitely get into the zone. Wait, that's the auto zone, isn't it?
The chat was right with you on that one.
As long as they're not zoning out.
I mean, maybe we are zoning out. We're looking for the signal and the noise here.
We are. Signal to noise ratio is yeah.
Sorry, were we talking about something important?
So we're trying to move towards a more zoneless future. That's something that we're interested in. It's going to be a much more performant approach. We're eager to get there. Signals as a change detection driver. We're looking at obviously I mentioned earlier, but progressive/partial hydration is on our roadmap. We're looking at server-side rendering and the overall experience there, which is something we've already been focused on, but we're continuing to focus on to try to improve that experience. And I think there's probably going to be a bit about authoring format and how signals impacts that, so that we can continue to. Our focus is really like fast at the start, and then also like just continuing to improve that developer experience. So
yeah, Yeah, I'm really interested to see how this plays out. Got another question from Linda. Did Signals start with Angular, or is that name idea from somewhere else, and this is Angular's implementation?
That's a very good question. Signals did not start with Angular. It actually started with Batman. No, it didn't start with Angular. I think Preact is where it began. It maybe even started before that. But it's been kind of a trend there's work being done to make it more of like a standard, and that's happening across frameworks. There's a working group that's kind of discussing signals as something that would be a very good, I mean, it is a very simple concept in theory, as far as like what a signal actually is. And so it would make a very good underlying web standard. Angular has its own implementation internally. It is a shared implementation that's used not just in Angular, but it's used in other parts of Google by other frameworks as well. So it has a lot of investment, but there are other signals libraries. And I know that Solid has one, and we've spent time collaborating with Ryan on our own implementation. Like he was a collaborator and us kind of coming up with the way our library works. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's. I mean, I feel like signals have sort of taken the hearts and minds of developers recently, and I think it's for good reason, right? Like we've felt a lot of pain around state management, and I think that part of that was because we learned about observables, but a lot of us never got our head around them entirely. Well, I was one of those. And then we saw the other ways that people were managing state, and it felt very, it's tough when you start trying to think of the Redux flow or some of the ways that React implemented it, where it's very like cyclical, and you feel like you're running loops to make things work, and then that starts to get really complicated. So this idea of you have a value, and that value is reactive, as long as you've kind of like followed the signals pattern, that is really powerful stuff, and I can see why it's showing up everywhere, and I'm really, really happy to see that it's being driven toward a standard, because that's sort of, in my mind, that's really the end game that any framework should be playing, is like, how do we get everyone to standardize on a primitive so that it can go into the platform? And then we don't have to ship all this code anymore. It's just there for us, and we can delete 5,000 lines of code out of our framework. That was like jQuery's ultimate achievement, is it fundamentally changed the way we write JavaScript, and now we don't technically need it anymore. Like, isn't that great?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's see, we got a couple questions here. Wait,
and it gave us the sizzle selector too, which is one of my favorite memes.
Very, very, very good.
It goes along with rendering too. You always have a lot of things sizzling when you're rendering.
Any plans to have signals as a separate package to the framework, or is it? So I guess if it becomes a standard, obviously it separates. But you mentioned that it's a shared implementation. So is there an intention to offer that shared implementation as a separate part, separate from Angular?
So as it is right now, the signals library is a part of core, part of Angular's core. I think there is some desire to have it be a separate publishable package, but I don't think that conversation has happened yet. So I think it's possible. It's possible that would be something that you could just use. I think that would probably be really nice, because I think it's a great library. So
excellent. Well, we are coming up on time here, so chat, you got like a couple more minutes if you want to start getting any last second questions in. Jessica,
Angular, otherwise you can ask about robots, what have you.
Also that, yeah, we can go off topic. Linda wants bacon. I want bacon.
Always.
While we're waiting to see if any questions come in, let's do one last round of, for somebody who wants to take this and go further, I'm going to link again to the deferrable views here. So this is where you can find it in the Angular tutorials, and you can play with them right in the browser. If somebody wants to go beyond, where else should they go? What are the resources they should be looking for?
They can use the guide we looked at, the defer guide. You can also, there's also instructions here on how you can actually start working with the Angular CLI and play with it locally on your machine, and start building with this on your local machine, to start actually building an app if you'd like to. So that's probably the best place to get started with defer. I know Mark Thompson has some really great fundamentals out there. So if you want to play with his content, which is fantastic content, Mark's an incredible educator, highly recommend trying out his content here too.
Yeah, let me find, when Mark was on, we talked about a bunch of Angular stuff. So if you want to dig in there, lots of good stuff to learn from that episode. And then we also have...
Someone may have crashed that that episode too.
Yeah, there's
Possibly.
surprise visit from you'd never guess who.
You'd have no idea. It's nope.
And then let's see, we're gonna do one more shout out to Jessica. So go find Jessica on all the places.
I am
Look,
on
look what's happening in the
Threads,
chat.
Mastodon.
Is
Yep.
it okay to pun on an empty stomach? Only if you can digest the humor. Just all of you. Just all of you. You know what? Today I would be okay with zero viewers. Like, all of you get out.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
I don't think you can stomach all of this fun. So
Okay. All right. So, Jessica, we've shared all your links. This is such cool stuff. I feel like if you've been looking at Angular as something that you don't think you should worry about, I think it's worth giving it a look. It's just got a lot going on. There's a lot of cool innovation happening in this space, and it's not the Angular that you might remember from 2017. So give it a shot. And if you're enjoying these episodes, please do let me know who you want to see on the show. You can leave a comment. Please, like the video, subscribe, share it with your friends, because that helps me make more of these. Jessica, any parting words for everybody before we wrap this one up?
I don't know. Be kind. Be kind to everyone. It's probably the easiest thing that you can do. It takes very little effort to just be kind. And please take care of yourselves. It's rough out there. And also,
I love it. I love it. I'll get one over there. Well said. I have nothing to add to that. So I'm just going to say this episode, like every episode, was live captioned. We've had Amanda here with us from Whitecoat Captioning all day. Thank you so much, Amanda. And that is made possible through the support of our sponsors, Netlify and Vetsu Code. With that, we're going to call this one done. Make sure you go check out the Learn Adjacent site, look at the schedule, see who's coming up next. We've got great episodes. Next week's going to be special, so make sure you tune in. I've got Adam Argyle in studio with me. It's going to be ridiculous. Make sure you tune in. We'll see y'all next time.
live long and prosper, everyone.